The Allies had secured their respective landing sites, but now they had to link up with those on their flanks to form a continuous lodgement. Grand Camp Maisie was between Omaha and Utah beaches. Americans from the 116th Infantry Regiment and Rangers from the 5th Battalion, supported by tanks from the 743rd Tank Battalion, started to move west from Omaha Beach towards Grand Camp Maisie in order to link up with elements of the 4th Infantry Division. And here we can see an aerial view of Grand Camp Maisie and the main route along the coast going east-west. This is Pont du Hable, over a river that ends at the sea to the north, but which swells and floods the low-lying ground to the south of the bridge. This terrain was impassable for armour and wheeled vehicles. The Germans knew this, of course, and they formed a blocking line on the high ground overlooking the bridge.
So before we look in more detail at the action that led to Frank Peragory being issued the Medal of Honor, I just want to give you a feel for what this character was like and to give you a bit of a backstory on his early life. So Frank Peragory was born in 1916 in Virginia in the United States, and he was one of 10 siblings, so he's quite a large family. And clearly if he's born in 1916, that means he's grown up during that Depression era, a really tough period in the United States. The other thing I want to touch on with Frank Peragory is that his story always seems to include either amazing good luck or terrible, terrible bad luck. And a really good example of this is that in 1931, Frank's mother sadly passed away. But to make things worse, in 1935, his father also passed away. So while Frank was still a young teen, his parents had both died, leaving him and 9 other brothers and sisters as orphans. Frank then joined the National Guard. So it was in February 1941 that Frank joined the 116th Infantry Regiment. Clearly in February 1941, the United States was not at war. But to give you a feel for this guy's character, he was awarded the Soldier's Medal. I'll put the medal on the screen so you can see it. And he was awarded that medal because he saved one of his fellow soldiers who had been trapped inside an overturned truck that had fallen into a canal. Now, Frank had actually jumped into the canal to save his friend who had been trapped inside. Now, seeing as we are on Omaha Beach, I want to touch on the next element of luck that affected Frank Peragory's life. Now, he was part of K Company of 3rd Battalion, 116th Infantry Regiment, and they were due to land opposite the D1 draw. If that sounds familiar to you, that's because that was characterized in Saving Private Ryan, where you could see all those fortifications and strong points on the bluffs firing down onto the beach. But in reality, that's also where the Bedford Boys landed, and they suffered incredible losses there. So Frank's company was due to land there. As luck would have it, the coastal currents and the tidal drift that was pushing all the landing craft to the east meant that Frank Peragory's company landed opposite the D3 draw, and they actually landed in between 2 strong points, so they weren't necessarily directly opposing those German strong points. This invariably saved lives within K Company. And having read the after-action report, I can confirm there was only 1 casualty from Frank's whole company as they landed on Omaha Beach. And that casualty was from a lieutenant who backed up into a soldier's bayonet and was stabbed in the arm. So we're just walking towards what was the D1 draw, and opposite that location is where Frank Peragory and K Company were due to land. And just look at this terrain, the bluffs that are overlooking the position. This is the beach right here. The tide's obviously right in at the moment, but that is the sea wall, and that's where they would have taken shelter on D-Day. But just look at this terrain looking down over the beach and where they would have advanced from. And this is where the Bedford Boys landed on D-Day, and they suffered some serious losses, some really terrible losses. And this is where Frank should have landed, right opposite this. Unfortunately for him, they didn't. They were washed further down the beach, and they actually landed towards the D3 draw, which is some 600 meters down the beach. Okay, well that's enough from Omaha Beach right now. We're going to head inland and look at the strong point that Frank Peragory assaulted by himself. So I'm now standing on a piece of high ground to the east of Pont du Hable, and you can see down there in the low ground is where the bridge is located. Beyond that, as the road starts to climb away and you can see it approaching an urban area, that is Grand Camp Maisie. So behind me is Pont du Hable, is Omaha Beach, and that is the direction where Frank Peragory and the 116th Infantry Regiment came from on the 8th of June. They advanced from the road behind me down towards the bridge. Now, the reason why this bridge is so important, it's so vital to those actions in the battle for Normandy, is because all of this terrain to the left is flooded. And on D-Day, it was even worse. You can just see how this terrain is not suitable for any sort of armor or any sort of vehicle at all. Even today, with modernized drainage, you can see just how inundated with water and how swampy this area is. And therefore, the only way to get from the east to the west and to connect the beaches of Omaha and Utah was to secure this bridge. And yet for some reason, this action is largely forgotten about. And it was during this action that Frank Peragory was awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, as the Rangers and the men of the 116th Infantry Regiment reached this location just before the bridge, they came under withering fire from German defenders who were dug in along that ridge line across to the right hand side that you can see, and all the way towards the urban area up there, which is Grand Camp Maisie. They were dug in fortified positions, trench systems, they had Tobruks there, and they were firing down onto this position, preventing any sort of maneuver by the Allies. The Allies tried to go to the right, and there is a river there which they couldn't cross, and they also tried to go to the left, and they got completely bogged in. When they tried to send armour over the bridge, there were Shermans that were knocked out on the bridge because of mines that had been laid here as well. So remember, the Germans had identified this as a choke point and had defended it with mines, wire, obstacles, and then of course they covered it with fire. Okay, so we're going to cross this bridge just as that Sherman tank did on the 8th of June, and just as Frank Peragory would have done. And this is a busy road. There are cars flying up and down, so it may get quite noisy when cars are going by. I've tried to minimize filming when the cars are going by. But this is the exact route that they took whilst under fire from that high ground in front of us the whole time. This road was completely covered by fire, by machine gun fire, by mortars. And you can see now that we're crossing the river. That is not something that you could get a quick bridge across, especially whilst under fire. And they got to this point. There was no more going forward. They were completely pinned down and stuck in this location. And there was only one thing for it. Frank Peragory leapt into action and ran up the road.
Now, hopefully I've given you a sense of what it must have been like here. Down here in the low ground while the Germans are overlooking your position and firing down onto you. There really was nowhere to go other than to dig in or to charge the position.
And on the other side of the bridge, of course, you can see the river continuing. So it's actually pretty wide, and this was a natural obstacle which the Germans used. So you can see that they could observe this river here from their defences up on that high ground. They were right up on the crest there, firing down into this position. So if anyone tried to flank to the right and cross this bridge, or if anyone tried to flank to the left and cross this bridge that way, they were observed by the Germans and fired on. So in this area, it would not surprise me if you had a metal detector that you found bags loads of shrapnel. There was a Sherman tank destroyed right here on the bridge through an anti-tank mine. We're now on the high ground at Grand Camp Maisie, and you can see the urban area just off to our front here. So if I turn around, you can see the area that we've just come from. You can see the road going away down into the dead ground, and then it comes up again where that car has just passed, up into the high ground again. So the bridge is down there in the dead ground. Now this is where the Germans were located. they occupied trenches and defensive positions in this field right here. And in fact, you can still see the remnants of one of the buildings. That's I think that's the only building that remains from the defensive position. And they could cover that road and the bridge with fire from their position. So let's go and take a look.
This is the defensive position. You can see the trenches here in green. The red line is the barbed wire which surrounded the position.
Now, as we walk towards this German position, I'm going to read the citation for Sergeant Frank Peragory. So on the 8th of June 1944, the 3rd Battalion of the 116th Infantry was advancing on the strongly held German defences at Grand Camp in France, when the leading elements were suddenly decimated by machine gun fire from a firmly entrenched enemy force on the high ground overlooking the position. After numerous attempts to neutralise the enemy position by supporting artillery and tank fire had proved ineffective, Technical Sergeant Peragory, on his own initiative, advanced up the hill under withering fire and worked his way to the crest, where he discovered an entrenchment leading to the main fortifications 200 yards away. Without hesitating, he leaped into the trench and moved towards the emplacement. Encountering a squad of enemy riflemen, he fearlessly attacked them with hand grenades and bayonet. He killed 8 and forced 3 more to surrender. Continuing along the trench, he single-handedly forced the surrender of 32 more riflemen, captured the machine gunners, and opened the way for the leading elements of the battalion to advance and secure its objective. Outstanding.
Sergeant Peragory's single act of selflessness and bravery undoubtedly prevented the assault from stalling, and it will have saved lives. Another example of his good luck, as he charged this position by himself and found an entrance to the trench system that was unguarded. But Frank's luck would not last. Only days later, on the 14th of June 1944, Frank found himself fighting through the Normandy bocage north of St. Lo. Here the fighting was close, it was hedgerow to hedgerow. He was killed as he assaulted a German position, and Frank never lived to be awarded the Medal of Honor.
Okay, we're now heading our way into Grand Camp, and you can see a memorial here to the National Guard. I believe it's to the 116th Regiment as well. We'll go and take a look. And the memorial is actually placed inside a Tobruk. And if you've watched this channel before, you'll know that we've seen lots of Tobruks along the way. For those of you who don't know, a Tobruk is a defensive position, a German defensive position that the Allies named after the defences that they saw at Tobruk when they're fighting through the desert. And you can see that this place is named after Frank Peragory. Absolutely brilliant. It tells the story there. It says that he captured 35 soldiers, slightly different to his citation. So if you enjoyed this video, why not raise a toast to Sergeant Peragory next time you have a drink? And if you enjoyed my Normandy videos, I've added some in the links above that you can check out. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.